The last upload that I did, it was titled something like "Where Are All the Workers Gone?" and I posed it as a question. In posing it as a question and posting that audio and that video in a couple of places, I got a lot of answers in the places that I posted it. So I thought I'd do a kind of comeback accompanying video where instead of just asking the question again, where are all the workers in terms of worker shortages, I would post people's answers. I would go through people's answers and I'd go through the different components and why people think there are worker shortages when there isn't actually a shortage of people. I still count this as a departure from the direction that I intend to head with my channel and my content in general. But it got a lot of engagement and people were interested in it. And when I used to do podcasts back in the day, this was kind of the way that I did it, where I would pose a question and I would get people's responses, and then I would try and kind of mesh kind of and amalgamize people's responses into something more concise. You know, like when you're posting anything, certainly if it's something on like 4chan or even Reddit, it's not going to last that long, and then eventually, like, you come back and people are asking the same fucking question, and it's annoying. I like the idea of, well, if people keep on asking the question, there's like some first post, best post tier response that you can save, that you can give to someone that gives them basically everything that people are going to, like, bots kind of on auto repeat, are going to say over and over again in different contexts. The reference I used in the last video to spark this question was talking to the owner manager of a restaurant who, when I asked why is he struggling to find people, because he had a sign advertising for people, just like a lot of people around town, and it's quite a popular restaurant. Like, certainly with there being lots of kids around, you think there wouldn't really be that much of an issue. He lent into young kids just being completely demoralized, or like brain dead, or just like fucked, depressed, like a whole bunch of things. And with other people that I've talked to, I tend to write that off as cunty boomerisms, because I don't like writing young people off, because I can remember when I was younger, the same shit, like me as a, whatever I am, millennial, Gen Xer, I can remember dealing with the same versions of the shit that young people are dealing with now. Like, it's just like rehashed mixtapes over and over again. It's just that maybe now it's actually more applicable. I don't know. But in the responses to the video that I posted, I got a lot of responses, and I'll go through the top ones. The top ones, like the top 10 top hits, would be Zoomers are just spoiled and retarded. Boomers are spoiled, and the day of the pillow can't come fast enough. Everything is fucked, so why bother? People are just demoralized in general. Everything costs too much. Housing and rent cost too much, and that set off a bunch of cascade failures. Zoomers would be fucked even if the economy was good, because of the meds that they're on, smartphones, everything to do with social media and lobotomization by smartphones. Employers are just stuck up cunts, and they want people to work for nothing and will outsource employment over training people locally. Boomers will sell their assets to foreigners for a profit before they can transfer them to nil for their own kin. And the general vibe in relation to the economy and how things are being that the juice just isn't worth the squeeze anymore. Now, if you're happy with the bridged, condensed version, basically just stop here and go and do something else. But I thought there was such a lot of posts, like thoughtful posts that people put out there, that I'll actually go through them in more detail, and I'll break them down into categories. If that's interesting to you, then we'll dig in. I'll start with the Zoomers, because like that's relevant to where I started from. And someone who also worked in a restaurant and who replied said that for a lot of the Zoomers, phone and communicational skills are almost universally bad. Like, even the rare ones who have some natural work ethic, they can't hold a conversation with an adult. I've noticed personally that a lot of young people can't even hold eye contact properly, and they kind of look away, and it's very strange. More from this other guy, though. They have a hard time handling their emotions. I've had several throw literal toddler tantrums when things haven't gone their way on the shift. Tears from grown-ass 18-year-old men, quote-unquote. I've been shouted and sworn at on shift in front of customers and other colleagues. I've had to deal with more walkouts in the last couple of years than I have done in the rest of my career, because you can't ever trust a Zoomer to simply just watch a table and take a payment from them before they walk out the door. Theft was also fairly prevalent. A couple of my Zoomer staff had taken to having full-blown arguments with me if they wanted something, like they wanted an early finish, and I wouldn't mollycoddle them. So I began to ignore the worst of their behavior from the worst offenders. That doesn't work in the end. A couple of them started to sitting on the floor hunched over like a toddler would if they wanted me to send them home. None of them would complain about hours. They were happy to come in and do two hours of work and be sent home if it wasn't busy, and they couldn't find themselves something to do. Mitigating circumstances are that they weren't getting paid well. Minimum wage differs significantly between age groups in the UK. This is in the UK, okay. Also, during COVID, service changed in lots of shitty, arbitrary, or nonsensical ways, so they weren't getting trained to do the job right. But there is no denying their basic psychology is fucked for the most part and incompatible with this sort of work. Someone else said, most Zoomers I've met have been awkward, but I've come to be sympathetic towards them. They see the bullshit of this world plainly, having fresher eyes than those of us who have learned to cope in this clown world. Zoomers will figure things out because they are human, intelligent, and thinking just like we were when we were young idiots. Sure, some will not make it, but I can't expect the majority to fit in soon enough. If they're actually mad enough to want to fit into this clown world, as a matter of fact, I think I actually enjoy being around Zoomers the more I'm around them. They know it's a clown world. They've known from the start. I don't know if you're kind of born into a clown world, how easy it is to break out of it, though. Like, at the very least, I'm a millennial, so a lot of millennials can remember when, like, you didn't have smartphones, you didn't have the internet. I grew up with fucking dial-up internet. I'm kind of lucky with how I was raised in the middle of nowhere. In hindsight, thinking, oh my god, this fucking sucks, how lucky it is to actually not have grown up with a full-blown internet connection. Certainly if you go onto fucking GIF and you see what's happened over there. Now, in line with this train of thought, and I personally having grown up on a farm and not really being given a hell of a lot of leeway to just drop everything, kind of throw my hands down and cry, someone else said that children don't really get taught independence. They go from the careful eyes of their helicopter parents into a school system that commands no independent activity for the benefit of teachers, schools, metrics, then back to the careful eyes of their helicopter parents. Most of them do not escape the gaze of authority for even 5 seconds prior to turning 16, and hopefully getting a car that lets them drive away from these people. By that point, many lack the initiative to even escape that way. The cage is their mind at that point, not just around their bodies. Children are raised where they are protected from the harshness of the world, then they are thrown out to fend for themselves. So you have children who are raised to think they're all heaven's special little angel, then they're taught that every opinion is just as valid as the next, they're taught that emotions are more important than reason, they're taught that you have to be right to be happy in your work, you have the right to be happy in your work, and you're taught that you have the right to an income sufficient to your dreams. Yeah, I'll be honest, anytime I hear someone say, I have the right to X and the right to Y, I think, well, you have a responsibility to enforce those rights with guns and fists. If you can't do that, then you don't have a right to anything. You don't have a right so long as there aren't people who are willing to give you shit. Unless you can defend that right yourself. It's a privilege, but who gets it? And certainly, like we'll get onto boomers, who gets to have a whole bunch of privileges stacked up for them, and who is going to end up holding the bag. Moving on from the Zoomies, we've got millennials. Someone says, I actually remember people talking in 2008 about millennials being destined to be a lost generation. The idea basically being that whenever the economy eventually recovered, millennials wouldn't pick up where they left off. Younger age-appropriate people would be picked for those entry-level jobs, and the millennials would just be skipped. Nobody was going to come back to get them. They were going to pick the youthful people they expected. Millennials, therefore, would end up going their whole lives constantly trying to make up for that lost critical time of having come out of school in a recession. Someone else says, in relation to Gen X and Y, that you have two generations who weren't passed the torch of trades, knowledge, upper roles in society. When you leave Gen X millennials entirely in the service retail industry, they end up raising the children who want out of this sort of slavery. Demoralization is a huge part. Laziness is also part of it, too. What's the point? They know a lot of their generation is rebellious toward it as well. Someone else says, the silent generation lost a handle on boomers in the 60s, who then had kids who were raised with all of the hippie crap and accepted fed globalist shit in its relative infancy. who then had kids of their own without all of the character building the silent generation went through. And so they were cotton wool, they were emasculated, and now kids talk in phonics and need to take a fuck ton of meds to not break down. Moving on from the millennials, we'll go to the boomers. The boomers are retiring and dying, and there aren't enough Gen Xers, millennials, and zoomers to replace them. The boomers are like alpha testers in an MMO, and then the game is open to the public, aka every generation after them, 10 years later, and the alpha testers get bonuses and extra content, and alpha tester exclusive weapons and items in-game that will never be provided to anyone else. So powerful it breaks the game, but if you try to ask the company to balance the alpha testers' shit, you get jack shit of a response, and you better bet those alpha testers use those items. Yeah, like, I don't really give a fuck about video game analogies for this, but even talking to, like, my boomers, like, my beloved boomers, the pennies finally dropped for them that, considering the struggles that we've had, sticking together and keeping the business that we run together up and running, that, oh yeah, like, it's absolutely fucked. And I have a younger sibling who's trying to get out and is trying to rent and things like that, and it's impossible. And I've had these discussions so many fucking times, but boomers are lobotomized by television, and they just hear, certainly if you're in Australia, they'll hear on fucking Sunrise, like, oh, well, the kids, they're watching Netflix and they're eating too much avocados, and it's the same shit. It's just the same fucking shit over and over again, and it's so frustrating. You know, it's like if you won't put in any effort whatsoever to preserve the economic environment you had, then don't be surprised when your kids dump you in a nursing home and you start getting suffocated and abused by diversity hires. Moving on, but following on from the boomers, we have just housing affordability and the rent crisis. Now, it's kind of a joke, kind of not. Like, my idea is the homes and everything to do with property speculation completely fucking everything, whereas properties weren't really speculated on in the past as much as they were now. It would be to funnel people onto some type of HEX style system. Like in Australia, we have student loans where you only pay off the principal, essentially, and the hypothetical interest that you're paying on the loans, you're paying through earning a higher income and just paying more taxes. Like, that's the general idea. But in line with that system, the idea that I would have, if you could ever do it, and it would never work because people wouldn't want it, would be to grandfather home loans into that type of system where you only pay off the principal, but you pay off everything by having a certain amount of children, provided, if you factor in dysgenics, they're children that are raised up to a certain standard. Like, when it comes to rent and property affordability and people wanting to have like a nest for their kids, if they even want to have kids, or people don't even want to have kids because they think, well, I want to have my nest feathered first, but then that means that people who would be good parents, they want to prove that they're good parents by not having kids in poverty, but then people who are bad parents, they don't give a shit about raising how they raise their kids, they have kids in poverty. Like, it is dysgenic. Someone else said that you could have a system where the first two properties are taxed at normal property tax rates, but after that, for people who accumulate properties, they get taxed with a 50% property tax per property, so it just stacks and compounds. So the third property tax is 50, the fourth is 100, fifth is 150%, and so on and on. Like, overnight, you can kill off the, like, slumlord population. And I like that. That seems a lot easier to implement than my idea. But, like, whatever it is, whatever the fucking solution, not enough credit is given to the reality that people cannot afford on, like, less than a high school diploma working at a mill for a couple of years. People just cannot afford, like, the ratio of their income to rent, not even, like, putting a down payment on a property that boomers could. Like, that was a golden age, like buying Bitcoin at the bottom, but it wasn't like digital money. It was an actual thing that you need. It's an essential. Like, I don't want to live in a future where, well, Ayn Randian capitalism, everything is just wonderful and free, where we're speculating on, like, bottles of fresh water. Like, not if we don't have to be in that position. But if you need to have mass migration to offset population decline because people don't want to have kids, because people who want to have kids right or raise them in a good context, they can't afford to have kids, but then people who don't give a shit about how they raise their kids have lots of kids, and we use those new migrants as hypothetical tax-paying collateral for loans that we borrow against ourselves from a future that doesn't exist to subsidize things in the present that won't generate revenue into the future. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's brilliant. That's a fucking great death spiral, isn't it? Following on from the talk about death spirals, we have everything to do with COVID and COVID vaccine mandates, the clot shot. I was lucky enough that I was able to strong arm my way into getting away with it, but the side effect of that where I live, because I was in a state where I couldn't leave the state and I couldn't leave the country either. I just had to accept life in the middle of nowhere. Like, I couldn't even volunteer. Like, I wasn't even eligible for volunteering because I didn't want the vaccine that put my dad in hospital, where it's like, oh, well, like, there's very little risk for you. It's like, yeah, but there's more risk in a COVID vaccine having a negative side effect if you're related to someone directly who had a negative side effect, isn't it? It's like, well, that doesn't matter. Going back to boomer selfishness, definitely. Well, these young kids, they need to get 3 injections of an experimental vaccine, like, to make sure that all people who can have 4, 5, 6, or 10 jabs if they want are safe. But to hear from some other people talking about COVID and COVID vaccines and how it affected their business or their place of employment, here's someone who says, I can't find a job that doesn't require the vax. Can't do heavy lifting labor work because something's wrong with my heart and my Gibbs insurance makes me wait a month or more between appointments with a cardiologist. Every remote job has 1 week of in-person training and requires at least 2 shots. Retail cashiers need shots. Dispatch where you work alone in one room need shots. We had a vaccine requirement and lost 20% of our employees. After the losses, they abandoned requiring boosters. A lot of doctors pushed for required vaccines, but a lot of doctors also pushed against it. The requirements could be different among different departments, but I doubt EMTs are one of the required groups. Typically, it is exclusive to ER, OR, or anything to do with inpatient. Now, I know that had a temporary, at the very least a temporary hit on employment, but I don't know whether or not now, with lax mandates, I mean, there will be some mandates somewhere, but I don't know how much of an effect that's still having on people around now. Certainly if we go back to talking about, like, Zoomers not wanting, like, the low entry jobs, like, I don't know how many of those kids just don't want vaccines. Fair enough if they don't. Now, as I'm recording, I'm just scrolling through my notes now, and I've got like 4 or 5 pages of notes left to go. I might actually leave this here. Like, I've already gone way longer than I have for anything else that I've put out on this channel thus far. I've done longer form stuff before, but I've included the notes, like archive links to everything that I've been talking about, and all of my notes in the show notes. So if there's like anything else that's interesting, like, you can dig, but a lot of it is stuff that is intuitive. Like, people know, and maybe it's not, maybe they're not answers that you know how to immediately off the cuff articulate, but as soon as someone hears it, it's one of those things. Like, you hear it and it's like, oh yeah, I already knew all that. Like, it's fucked. It's Kali Yuga. It's going down. You don't know whether or not there's any way out of it. That was the reason that I asked the question. Really, it wasn't just what's happening or why is it happening. Is there actually a way out of it? Is there some light at the end of the tunnel? Like, you have to keep on eating shit over and over again. Well, in the past at least, the idea was you kept on eating shit, you would eventually get something out of it. Now, a lot of people are realizing that they eat shit and they get shit, and there's just no point. So a lot of people are giving up, and eventually, like, something has to give. Like, the dam will break, and you can only hope that with that dam breaking, there'll be opportunities for those people at least. Like, I'm good. I've got a forklift. I've got a slasher. I've got a tractor. Like, I'm good. I'm set. But I feel very bad for the people who don't have, like, those types of connections. Those people who can't just, like, bugger off without signing like 100 different forms and just go and, like, do some work, do some contracting. I'm blessed in that regard. It took a long time to actually appreciate. It took really kind of flitting in and out of work and going in between like, working in town and working in the city and trying things out to realize that, oh yeah, like, living not in the middle of nowhere, but kind of in the middle of nowhere, like, it's pretty lucky. I can only hope that other people can sort their shit out wherever they are, so that they get into a similar state. You know, I don't like it. I wish there was more philia. I wish we're all pulling in the same direction, but, like, if this is Babylon, like, we have no obligation whatsoever to keep it propped up. I'll leave it there, but It's night now. I hope you have a good night or a good morning, wherever you are.